Hello to everyone. Thank you very much for being here today with me, with Jason. Thank you very much, Jason. Today we will go further with our course, but I would like just to recall yesterday meeting with Franco Berardi Bifo. He did a discourse about the subjectivity in digital technology, and his idea of our future is not exactly exciting, because he, in his theory, we can say, the subject, as we have already known, has no possibility to survive, because subjectivity today is too much contagious, too much touched by technology. And so before yesterday talked about mutation as an irreversible process of transformation of humanity. And this process that is not reversible has to do with the transformation of the labor and of the capitalistic system that, according to Franco Berardi Bifo, is producing a fractalization of society, and so a fractalization of subjectivity. And in this fractalization, we are parts without awareness. We are not aware. And maybe in the future, the idea of consciousness and of awareness will be very different in confront of the past. In this mutation, certainly the most important would be try to conjunct. He talked about conjunction. That is a sort of overcoming of connection, but with a stronger and deeper meaning, and try to give a value to this sort of conjunction, so to start a process of event. According to Franco Berardi, the event is tied with the machine. This means that we won't have no more a life without a machine. Every feature of our life will be mediated always more and more by machine. And machine is an event, according to Franco Berardi, because it's something of external that changes us. I agree with Franco Berardi on a part of his analysis about the end of traditional subjectivity, and about the mutation, about the transformation of subjectivity into digital technologies. That means economy, that means capitalism, in a sense that capitalism today coincides with the development of digital technologies. My point is still a philosophical point, and so my work is to retrace the principles according to which this process is conducted. And my aim is to keep the hope, but I am aware of the fact that the hope won't be the same hope of the past, because rational willingness and conscious and so on subject that takes the decision to change the world won't be so like in the past, when I don't know, in past revolutions, for example, there were this attempt to let coincide the vision of the world with the transformation of the world. Probably we will face a sort of transformation of the world in which our awareness will be less relevant. But nevertheless, I'm trying to cultivate the ambivalence of the level of belief and the level of emotions and passions and all the intangible factors that help us to intervene in this process with unpredictability and unpredictable effect. It's a mediation. Maybe I will resort a sort of mediation between Franco Berardi of yesterday, and tomorrow we will meet Tiziana Terranova. She is more engaged in some process of transformation, so maybe she will have a vision more related to concrete experimentations with digital technologies. I know that she's working among the other topics on the Bitcoin, for example, in order to propose a different use of digitalities for a better society, for overcoming the inequality and the hierarchies. But I still would go on with my philosophical approach because it's my job and because I really believe that it's important to be able to recognize the fundamental patterns in this society, so to avoid the reproduction of the old schemes about subjectivity. Since I guess the main object of a post-Fordist society is exactly the subjectivity. I guess that at stake is the production of subjectivity, the production of a new humanity. In the past, we saw the design of a new biological model of humanity, but I guess that now there is another sort of design. This design of our psyche, because the psyche, I mean the plot of imagination, thoughts, emotion, and all qualitative dimensions that are related to what we feel, and so also with our body. This psyche as a unit still represent an incognita into the system of production. I would say still represent something that can be out of control. We know that this society is the society of control, like Gilles Deleuze told us only a few years ago, a bit to decades. And we are conscious of the control, but we don't even realize the concrete form in which this control acts on us. So, if you agree, I will go on reconnecting the discourse to the first day. And in the meantime, before I start with this discourse, if you have any questions or suggestions or comments about yesterday, please.
I had a question for you, Claudia, if you don't mind. How would you respond to the question, what is the relationship between the automation or mechanization of production and this new sort of mechanization of subjectivity in relation to technology? Because, you know, as Marx said, that, you know, historically there's been this distinction between variable capital and constant capital. Variable capital referring to human beings, and you know, who are very quote unquote variable in the sense that they may come into work tired, they may call in sick, they may form unions and go on strike, so they're kind of an unknown quantity. as opposed to technological production, which could break down, but generally speaking, the basic technology of production, as things become more and more automated, makes for a shift towards a different type of capitalism, a kind of high-tech capitalism in a way. So that is not so dependent on humans, and so with humans being kind of abandoned in this process, potentially on very large scales, up to 47% of current jobs, what relationship do you see potentially between the automation of production and the technologization of subjectivity?
Well, indeed, the mechanization of production will create a world in which the human labor will be no more necessary, of course, because the automation of machine is really developing so fast that is almost possible to reproduce every ability of humans. And what will happen to us? Well, in last decades, the loss of value of humanity has been concretized with exclusion from the job market and from the services by welfare state. So, for a certain, in a certain way, we can say that the market has already declared a war against humanity, because we are abandoned in our destiny. And what I have realized, because as I already told you, I'm from the south of Italy, is that in territories less involved into the digital technological transformation, because those territories are less advanced, we are just just abandoned and cultivated only as consumers. It's surprising. I've been in the Netherlands for 2 years, where I work as a researcher there, and I realized the difference between a capital state like the Netherlands, in which people almost don't use a lot of things, that instead people of the south use and buy, always buy, and the debt is increasing. The debt is the horizon in which we live, and this transformation of labor and mechanization of subjectivity, I guess that will lead always more part of the world into the production of consumers, but consumers indebted.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess that we really have to rethink our subjectivity, but also the problem of the debt that we don't have touched in this course, but that I think that is strongly related with the mechanization of society.
Yeah, it really makes me think about that theme in Agamben.
Yeah.
In the way that Agamben develops his unique concept of biopolitics, which in many ways is so much more radical, I think, than Foucault's. But this emphasis on the question of abandonment, of what is the subjectivity of a being who has been abandoned. Who's been abandoned by the law in his case, but you could also say, looking at this automation, abandoned by the economy as well. What is economic abandonment?
How
do we in relation to the biopolitical?
Yeah. In Agamben and also in the group named Tikkun, this idea of abandoned acquires a positive feature in the sense that it can be the rest of humanity from which to rebuild something. So it's a paradox, because in the poverty, we can say, in the abandonment, there is a production of the rest, something that remains outside, that will be always more big in terms of number. Or rather, we should try to stay inside this transformation and to create sabot. Sabot is a French term used by Deleuze that means shoe that in the past some workers put into the machines, so to break the machine. So we have more. I don't know which is the best. Probably we can't choose, because the grade of involvement is not only decided by us, but from processes, real processes that act on our life. But I guess that if we work on our awareness, maybe also using in this way, for example, like Gout, that is a new way to propose education and critical thinking, for example, we can be sabot in order to shift this boundary that has been posed between people.
Yeah. Bruce, do you want to? I don't want to divert the conversation. I just threw that in there to talk, but other people started posing some questions. So, do you want to address those questions, or would you like to go on for now, and then we can come back to them?
Yeah, I go on.
Okay. We'll come back to the questions later.
Okay. I don't know if we can define a subjectivity as a rest or as a potential. I'm only trying to work on the level of potentiality into a singular perspective. And in this, I would recall Laura when she proposed a reflection of the question of intensification. That is, I guess, really a great point, rather than to acceleration. Because in the past already there have been some movements that propose the velocity, but often their effects are not being really exciting. I guess that if we follow an ethical horizon, we should try to realize that it's important to intensify the positive, to intensify the level of subjective positivity, like a positive potentiality of our passions, and like an ability to still use our imagination that is partially colonized. It's I'm really fascinated, for example, by Facebook, because I studied Facebook in last year like a phenomena, and I realized that my imagination in last year was the same of the imagination from someone from China, from USA, because we saw the same the same film, the same movies, and this is a bit disturbing, but at the same time maybe it can be also a weapon, because we can understand each other about what is happening to us. And so this is the double, I guess, the double side of the what Michel Foucault called le panoptisme, the panopticon. According to Foucault, in surveiller et punir, the birth of the prison. According to Foucault, the panoptism is that sort of apparatus that is able to redesign the ethics, to redesign the values, the moral thinking, and is able to preserve the health, because we are nourished by this system. And at the same time, the panopticum is able to spread the knowledge. So it acts through the knowledge. And this is something about, we already talked, this relation between knowledge and power. And so we know knowledge is a very qualitative dimension. It's not possible to conceive a knowledge without imagination, without desire, without an emotional involvement. The power is something that is vehiculated by those feelings. For certain ways, we can also think of Nietzsche's will of power, that in Deleuzian readings is a sort of desire of power. So the power is the effect of the action of desire. And this means that we have different feature of desire that can be productive of conjunction, recalling before, but also negative, like bearer of despair. And in this sense, we can say that the traditional subjectivity is no more possible, because traditional subjectivity, we think of Hegel, has been theoretized as a contradiction, as something that produces itself through the contradiction. This contradiction with defined subject is no more possible. And we live in a flux in which we can recognize some poles that are not in contradiction. This is the problem. And what can we do? We can push the desire in the direction of the positive pole, that is the joy. And this is Spinoza, you know. But also the social field is done by those forces. So that's why it's so important. Foucault also teaches us this. And we realize that with Nietzsche, that the power of the will of power, and we can say also desire of power, is the force that has won among another force, determining and influencing the other forces in this field. But with Nietzsche, we know that this force that has won is the worst force. According to Nietzsche, are being the reactive forces that have won in our culture. This is not an irrelevant point, and that's why we live in such world, because has won a feeling of resentment that has produced this society. And that's why, for me, the problem of belief is very important. But I will just to specify that the level of belief. I face the level of belief in an empiricist sense, which means that I relate to the belief not as a fragile and infantile or depotentiated activity, but as something like a passionate feeling of our body-mind with many potentiality, the potentiality to produce also something of unexpected, that something like can be a sabot, maybe. The problem is that this power of resentment oppresses us, but this scheme of power is nourished by our condescension. I mean that the subject often participate in this oppression when they fail to release their desire, when they adopt their worst feelings as the core of their life, and when their desire, their emotions and perceptions are managed by a power stronger than them, an external power that guides them. We talked already about the shepherd. So also Deleuze, I often relate to Deleuze, when interpreting Hume, tells us that the passions, emotions, and imagination are the components of the beliefs, which means the components of the motivations to act. And beliefs are passions capable of producing effects on reality. And these effects are not marginal but central, and act a central role in laws, economics. We think, for example, of laws that are designed according to this resentment. In fact, according to Deleuze, the law, this imagination, this passion, is at the moment is a sort of law in which prevail the volunty to limiting the other. Don't do so. While the law, for example, in a passionate way, would be also something of different, something that improve the growth of people. It's a really different exit. It's not a case if liberals pay much attention to the feelings. In fact, if we read Smith and Hume or Kant, and I suggested you those readings, we realize that they discuss the sympathy, the feelings, and even love. And it's surprising because we wonder why they write about love, for example, but we all, only have studied them at school like economists, like theoreticians of politics and economics. But if we read them, we realize that they conceive the structure of the new modern mercantile organization as an organization that takes care about the feelings, because feelings can lead us to accept or to refuse. And so that's why it's really very important. And I guess that we all, for a period, have misunderstood the digital technology, because in the general idea, we thought that technology was a tool for information, but it's not only this. It's not only information that passes through digital technology. It's mostly passions, emotions, and our acceptation to be governed in our feelings. I guess so that at stake with technologies is really our belief. And we have to address critically the power that manipulates our feelings, because it limits our life. It limits the ability of individuals to act. As in the first day, I already told you, I was really surprised to realize that in Italy, people don't react, accept everything. It's incredible. And I guess this is the effect of this sort of governmentalization of emotions, because people is anesthetized. This night, for example, is arrived another boat from the Mediterranean Sea, fulfilled by immigrants. And every day it happens that thousands of, sorry, not thousands, but hundreds of people dies into the Mediterranean Sea. But there is an absolute anesthetization, and so the policy that manages those fluxes of immigrants can act with no intromissions. And I guess that it is a concrete example of this dramatic stage of our awareness, because as also Franco Berardi stated yesterday, it's difficult for us to feel solidarity, which has been one of the most important force for politics. We are used to believe in a representative model of politics without realizing that the power acts through different forms of government. And in fact, we already talked about this, about the discursive level and the management of our behavior and emotions. That is, under a philosophical perspective, an old problem, because already in Plato there was the problem of politics. But if we read Plato, already in his thoughts, the problem of politics coincides with the management of passions, with the management of reactions, of multitude. And so already in Plato, it was so important, the education of passions, according to a model that could be applicable to all. For example, is very famous is critic to music, because music can wake up some feelings in us that could transform us in something of not out of control. But this is the Western apparatus. So it's not only today. Today there is the phenomena that is the digital technology, but I guess that in this digital technology is being conveyed a Western model of power that is really sometimes also hidden, and we don't realize how does it work. But certainly today, the problem of knowledge of power in neoliberal capitalism has produced so much destruction, inequality, and impoverishment that we can't keep our eyes closed. Also because it has produced a lot of loneliness, mental illness, depression, and so on. And always recalling Nietzsche in the Gay Science, Nietzsche stated that our task, the task of philosophers, is always to rekindle the dormant passions. We have to wake up people, said Nietzsche. In which way? Trying to stimulate their passions. Only stimulating passions, said Nietzsche, humanity can go forward. Because the passions are those that produce confrontation, also contradiction, pleasure, experimentation, challenge of knowledge and opinions. So we have the duty to fight against the dominion of sadness. And I often recall, as you can see, Spinoza. So Deleuze, Nietzsche, Spinoza, Hume, for me, are my main references. And the effect of power is deadly when it acts on the conatus. Which means that basic force that every one of us, every living being has got, that is a force that pushes us to live. And so we never have to accept the death, because if we accept the death, the sadness, and the passivity, every opportunity is over. And so it's important to make a philosophy of possibility. And the problem of vitality is very strong today, because we are surrounded by a form of power that sucks the life energy. So this power, this apparatus, is invisible. We can no more see the disciplinar power, because the boundaries are no more visible. We think to be free, but we are guided. Because we live in a society of control. But the problem is not simply the control, because for certain ways, control can help us to live more secure, or rather, this is the rhetoric of power, about security. But the problem is that we live into structures that are not neutral, but I really believe that it's something that is producing a new humanity more functional to the system, because power is not interested in our sickness of emotions or in our sadness. For maybe we can say that it's better for the apparatus that we are sad, because so we accept incredible transformation of society without react. So the material conditions of every one of us have worsened, but the reaction are not being, I guess, enough focused on this. Also, if we had many movements of protest, but those movements of protest can't reach a sort of organization, so to go on, and then they finish in a short time. And because I guess that we have internalized a sort of belief through which our passions have predetermined reactions. So I guess that the way, because I am a philosopher, I am not a political leader. My way is a Nietzschean way, that is to stimulate passions, because they have a great power. But probably others can tell you something of different, and I hope so. Because I don't want to give up. I only say that it's not possible. I want to stay in touch with who are doing different experiences. That's why I guess that Terranova tomorrow will report us what's happening. She has been in the UK in last year, and she was very involved in many experiences. If you want, I can stop for a few minutes, or I can go on. I've lost you.
I can hear you.
I can hear you too.
Hello?
Jason?
Yeah, is something wrong?
Yeah. Okay, now I can hear you. I was wondering if someone wants to tell something, or
Okay.
if I have to go on.
I see, sorry. Just so everybody knows, you can also, you can unmute yourself as well. What you do is you go to the top of your box, of your box in the Hangout, and you'll see a little downward pointing caret. You click on that, and then you can click unmute. I just had to go to the kitchen for a minute, so I didn't know that we had transitioned to that. So so if you click unmute, I'll just unmute everybody, so everybody should be able to speak. Yeah, actually everybody is unmuted. So so go ahead and raise whatever questions you might have.
Can I go ahead since nobody's going? We had a little bit of a discussion on the side while you were lecturing, and one of the points that Bruce and I kind of discussed was the potentiality of these emotions and feelings that that are there. For example, Laura raised the point that hashtagging on certain news is not really useful, and I kind of responded that in some sense the technology is also a way to channel the charge. I mean, it gives us the information and the ideas, but through those likes on a certain post, through a sharing, it discharges minimally without really causing any effects into the broadest issues that are there. If you can elaborate if we are right in this or what we should think of it, if that kind of if technology is being used as also in a way it's being used to, for instance, Facebook. I can give you an example. Person in Kansas went around shooting Jewish people for whatever reason, and friends shared it, and through that one like, I moved on from that topic completely. Right, so there was nothing. Like it discharged that emotion that I had for that event that happened, but at a minimal level. So I never did anything really, but it allowed me to let it out a little bit, so it will not pile up in me. If you have anything to say in that regard.
Yeah. Thank you, Selim. Just because I can't hear you very well, I want to be sure to have listened well. So, if Jason, please, can you synthesize me the points, because
Okay, sure.
I can hear you very well, while
Okay.
Salim, I can't hear you very well.
so I think I'm just going to focus on the last part of the question. So what I understand Salim to be asking, it kind of reminds me of Noam Chomsky a little bit. You know, where there's this idea that there used to be this sort of hatred of the mass media or not hatred, but this a kind of right-wing. What was the term that he used? Oh, flack. Constantly, that various institutions would and economic forces would give the media flack for being too left-wing. So they would say, oh, the liberal media. Oh, all we ever hear is this liberal propaganda from the media and that sort of thing. And I think that has kind of changed with social media, because now anybody can speak, right? So, and if you already believe that the mass media is liberal or progressive or whatever, or socialist if you're really crazy, if you already believe that our mass media is on the left, then social media suddenly makes you feel as though you have a chance to express yourself. Walter Benjamin talks about this idea of that what fascism does is it liberates. It doesn't actually liberate people. It doesn't change the relations of production. It just gives people a chance to express themselves. But that self that they are expressing is one that is produced by fascism and capitalism. And this isn't. And so this is sort of ad-libbing on top of what Salim was saying. But what Salim was bringing up was how we have this sort of emotional deadening, I think. Like, in that we can, we hear about some atrocity, we hear about an event, and we may like something, we may click it, or make a comment saying like, oh, that is really horrible. But when you do that, you have a feeling of a discharge, right? Did you say that, Salim?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, you have a feeling that you've expressed yourself. You have a feeling that you've made some small difference, but at the same time, you do it all day long for all kinds of different issues, to the point where like, how does, what type of subjectivity is being produced there? Are we really doing anything, or are we just sort of creating more data for the social media profit-making project? Is that about right, Salim?
That's precisely what I kind of wanted to. You formulated much better than I could.
Oh.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Salim. Thank you, Jason. I'm not sure to be really able to answer, but I will try to. For certain ways, I agree with Benjamin, because he already realized that we have raised into many illusions, and those illusions about ourselves are being vehiculated by the consuming of images and by education. I guess that the social, in general, we should make some differences between technologies and pre-digital technologies and digital technologies. And it's interesting to say that digital technologies, especially the use of internet and social network, are initially are being really the bearer of a transformation of the relation and transformation of subjectivity, also in a positive sense, because it was a technology that wasn't born into the national frame. We can say that internet is not born as a nationalistic technology, while in the past other form of technology are being nationalistic in the sense that served the state. And so in this way served the biopolitics and the totalitarian regimes and so on. And we can see this in the history. While social networks are not limited geographically, also if it's not really true, in the sense that we think of China, in which social networks are not allowed, or in any other countries in which are very much controlled. So there is always this sort of shifting between an initial freedom and then the capture. We can say the tree and the rhizome in a perpetual relationship. And we can maybe try to change this relationship, becoming more aware about the way in which the technology is guided and constructed. For example, when we buy a computer, on this computer are already been installed some softwares that we don't have chosen, for example, and the software are Microsoft softwares, and we never think about this, but it is already a predetermination of the potentiality of the technology of our computer. So technology in itself is not evil, is not good. It's important our awareness of the phenomena. If we, for example, do experimentations in new softwares that let us to be aware about the functionings, we can choose the way in which relate ourselves. So social network has produced some form of liberations also for me, because it let us to connect to other people and to invent a new form of subjectivity than my starting point. But I am aware of the fact that I can't change the functioning because I am ignorant about the functioning. And the big challenge for us is to become aware about the structures. I mean on the hardware level and on the software level. But the philosophical work is also aimed to become aware about the cultural structures, because I guess that this sort of subjectivity that digital technology produced is a judgmental subjectivity that produces the exclusion of the differences. In this sense, I guess that the production of subjectivity today is aimed to produce a fascist subjectivity. And it's I know it's not really a nice perspective. I don't know if I have answered you. This is my vision. Well, don't know. Thank you. But sorry, it would be really interesting to do an experiment together, trying to remember the way in which, for example, Facebook is changed. I remember many changing in the design of Facebook, because I was an activist on Facebook, and I am no more an activist on Facebook because I have no more the same opportunity to communicate some contents. So it would be great for me if you help me to reconstruct this brief history of Facebook. If you remember something about the changing in design, it would be great.
I would love to have been on Facebook since early 2006 as part of student movements. When it started to be just for students, Facebook was only for students at that point in 2006. And there's been tremendous changes from the way it looks to the functions that are there, and it continuously changes. So maybe I can, yes, maybe I can work on tracing back what kind of changes there has been. So for sure, I would love to.
Yeah, it would be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shall I go on? I go on.
I just wanted to call attention to something that Laura said. I'm not sure if she's there, but she said this was written when I was bringing up the idea from Walter Benjamin, where he says, it's at the very end of the work of art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, the very last paragraph. He says that rather than changing relations of production, fascism, or rather than changing the relations of production, fascism gives the masses a chance to express themselves via the new technologies. And Laura added to that. She said, but when women express themselves, they are trolled. They are trolled in social media in very forceful and punitive ways. So they get negative comments. They're being men can sort of post freely and not worry too much about getting like an angry response, partially due to the different emotional and just basic perceptions of like who should be respected, who should not be respected, that kind of thing. That they are trolled in very forceful and punitive ways due to sort of patriarchal perceptions and constructs. And she goes on to say, so not everyone can feel that they can express themselves. The comment section in a newspaper, on an online newspaper, for example, is an important innovation for the society of control. So you get so in control society, people feel as though they can express themselves as long as they are in the empowered position of basically an upper class white male. Then they will feel free to comment and speak freely all over social media, and they'll also feel free to punitively shut down women and minorities and others into and that sort of thing. And it so how does this trolling relate to gender and subjectivity in that sense?
Well, great point. I would thank Laura. Sure, the interaction is certainly a big opportunity for us because we can answer, we can do comments, of course. We are not only passive, like when we read a newspaper, but this is, I guess, the problem of governmentality. Governmentality functions exactly through the production of discourses about ourselves. So we must be aware about this. Because, and I will tell this after when I will retake the discourse, but just wanting to answer to the gender problem. The social networks are being immediately used as the field of expression, for example, of a feminist group. Also, if they are being often attacked. Me too, I tried several avatars because I wanted to do this kind of experiment. I tried a male avatar and then a collective avatar, trying to understand the differences of reactions to my comment, for example. And I guess that it's not neutral, the standpoint, the starting point, the position of who says what. And I still believe that women have not still the same opportunity to put in place a discourse. Also, if we have the technical opportunity to do comments. But I will return on the production of discourse, because I guess that it's not a casualty if we have this opportunity. I don't want to be paranoid, absolutely. I want to be aware, because I guess that only in this awareness of the managing of our behaviors, we can enact something different. So if I can, I will go on. Or if there is another comment.
Bruce, did you want to articulate that, or?
Sure. I just was going to allow you to sort of mediate, Jason, in case you wanted to move forward. I just take a somewhat different take on the topic that we're discussing. I see the emotive and aesthetic attributes, if you will, as effective platforms for action, and perhaps the most compelling and urgent platforms for action. And what we've been discussing over the past few minutes has to do with, I think, two dynamics. First of all, that the emotions, by definition, are common definition, removed from orderly, rational processes, and necessarily involve some unpredictability, let's say. But the second point is that goes to how this, what I think, a very effective platform has to be handled. It is more of a challenge to handle it because of these very valid points that people have raised over the past few minutes, but it is not a reason to completely disregard it as a platform. In a similar point, the fact that the government works so hard to control and siphon and corral emotive aspects, I think highlights the very potency of the emotive and aesthetic aspects as a platform.
I missed some points. I lost you in some part.
Let me try to say it with less words. I see the emotive and aesthetic aspects as an effective platform, troubled and flawed, but still an effective platform.
The aesthetics?
Aesthetics and emotional.
Yeah. Yeah.
Flawed, but still an effective platform.
Platform for changing, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, yes, I believe so. I believe that aesthetics, the aesthetic dimension, still can help us to the positive use of unpredictability. Yeah, I basically agree with this. But the problem is that aesthetics is the main level of action of digital technology on us, because every information, every diktat also passes through an aesthetic level. Aesthetics has been very used. I loved very much the experiences of art of 20th century. But I wonder if today it is possible to do such experiences. But basically, I guess that aesthetics and arts also are still the main horizon of a positive changing, because aesthetics stimulates in us something of new. And yeah, basically I agree with this. But we have to be aware of the fact that capitalism knows it.
Yes, capitalism knows it, but we cannot abandon that as a platform that concedes the whole movement, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yes. I guess that aesthetics has big potentialities, but the problem of limitation of our aesthetical experiences is related to the way in which we interpret our affections. Affections, I refer to the word affectus. There's a Latin word that has been used by Spinoza, is a double meaning. Is a sentiment and perception. And so the level of affectus is the level of aesthetics, but it has also a big potentiality in ethics, as also Spinoza told. The problem is the way in which we interpret. And I can see that we are less able to give space to a creative interpretation of our feelings. If you for example, consider this problem of interpretation of our feelings on an aesthetic level, we realize that the lexicon of people has been reduced very much. The number of words and the number of categories and the number of concepts that we use to understand, interpret, and to also rehabilitate some affections has been reduced. And this is also a big problem, I guess, because we are being used to a consuming level. And so we want to define in a very fast way our feelings without let our feelings open something of new. This is the way in which we are being educated. But we can, I don't believe in a totally irreversible process. I guess that something can be still stimulated in us, of course. Can I go on? Or Jason? I've lost Jason.
Hi.
Yeah. Can I go on?
Yes, please.
Well, about the level of aesthetics, for example, the level of perception, and I will do a reflection on the mechanism. In fact, if everything is a stream of images, if we follow, for example, a philosopher that I never mentioned until now, and I refer to Deleuze. Well, I'm joking. Everything is a stream of images, and so in what is philosophy, the level of affectus, the affections and perception is the big challenge for philosophy, contemporary philosophy. And so the level of images is not something that is an entertainment, but it's something of ontological. So that's why we can talk about images in motions, because there is an ontological involvement of subjectivity into this production of images and perceptions. And according to my point of view, this idea derives from Aristoteles, according who the truth of the things is their form. And still in Deleuze, the surface receives a renewed value. And that's why I guess the digital technology and the videos, the movies are so powerful on us, because we believe in the surface of the things. This is this is our culture. We believe in the surface of the things. And I remember many years ago an advertisement of a car by the big house of production Volkswagen. And in this advertisement, the Volkswagen geniuses of communication stated, the surface is a promise. So this advertising was this car, a black car by Volkswagen, and on this car there were the writing, the statement, the surface is a promise. It's interesting, this intersection between surface and promise, because this reminds us the problem of salvation that we'd already touched. Which surface? In this particular case, it was referred to the surface of the car, but we can refer it to everything, because it's a way to read the reality. And this means that if you enter in this vision, if you see the car, you receive a promise. This is the power of the apparatus that gives us promises through the surface to something that we perceive with our senses, we see, such as our affections, because it involves at the same time the double level of affectus, the level of perception and the level of sentiments, what we feel like a promise of happiness, of joy. So we received this legacy that has commodified the happiness and joy. And this commodification of the happiness and joy coincides with the exaltation of the surface. That's why, I guess, this is my reading, we are so passionately involved into what we see mediatically, because we believe in the promise of youth, of wealth, of happiness. We've lost the complexity of happiness and of joy, and we let the happiness and joy to be coincided with the commodities that are the surface of a promise of salvation. So we have this double problem, as I told you for the first lesson, when we talked about the double articulation of apparatus, like discourses, but also like visibility, this double level of enunciation and visibility. This is an example. Because through the surface passed the important value. The example that I did is a really incredible and disturbing and touching and moving message that vehiculates a value about our life with few words. It's really interesting for me. And so the problem is when we accept this interpretation of our life. In few words, we have accepted the coincidence between surface, between promise, and between happiness. So the problem arises when we want to define and interpret what happens to our perceptions and our emotions, and in general to what we feel. And now I will propose you a reference that maybe will seem strange to you and maybe far away from this discourse, but I guess that it is useful because it regards the mechanism. I am interested in the mechanism. How does it work, this apparatus? And we approached the discursive and the visibility level of the apparatus. But I want to say something more about the production of the fascist subjectivity that I guess is at stake today. And so I will recall Carl Schmitt. Maybe you know him, and he wrote the famous book, The Nomos of the Heart. And I quote from him, and then I will comment. He says, at the beginning of the history, is always in the process of setting up some form of occupation of land. This is also true for the beginning of each historical epoch. The occupation of land is the putting down roots in the realm of sense of history. And again, in the origin of the historical process, there is for Schmitt a mechanism to put roots in the realm of history. What does it mean to put roots? It means to occupy something, putting inside this object of power a root. The root is something that is connected to what will be developed later. So every new historical era are an event of space, you can say, like a conquest, an appropriation. It maybe can be strange for you this, but for me it's a very metaphorical, this example. Because the mechanism of dominium and imperium, two Latin terms for power, are constructed through these stages that I recognize also in subjectivity. The first stage is the taking of possession, like a conquest of a territory. The second point is the division and the establishment of boundaries, the activation of property ownership, dominium or imperium, that is as nomos teilin, that means to divide. And finally, the third point is the growth, is the nourishment, the value of the ground by division, therefore the production, consumption, that is the nomos weiden, that means from German grazing. It's interesting for me this passage from Schmitt, because those metaphors, Schmitt wasn't a metaphor, because he was really referring to the mechanism of power on the things. But the same terms we can find in Foucault and in Deleuze referred to the subjective level as something that is guided by a shepherd, and so the level of nourishment, and we find the same verb that is grazing, and is the same mechanism of visible power of disciplinary society that becomes invisible, but the mechanism is the same, is producing into subjectivity a void that is the legal subjectivity, like moralistic ego that suddenly divides and that is nourished by the governmental scheme of power. And so maybe it's a bit provocative, this reference, but I guess that is useful to understand that the fascist theorization is exactly this, and that I guess that is happening to our subjectivity, like a sort of thing that has been taken, that has been took by the capitalistic system. And I guess that the body has been treated as a territory, as a space. It is a cultural scheme that derives from Descartes with this concept of res extensa. And this is prevailed on the idea of a body as the place of perception and passions. In res extensa is a territory that has been conquered and limited, governed. We don't have an active rule of passions. While in a different perspective, the Spinozist one, the body is not res extensa, like only matter, but is something that is able to produce some passions that don't need the intervention of an external apparatus. And of course, with the reflection of 20th century, there is this problem of res extensa has been very much discussed. But I would recall a good tool to overcome this mechanicistic idea of organism, recalling Simondon, that has conceived the subjectivity as a landscape in which converge natural and technical elements into a continuum. And in this continuum, of course, technology has an important role, so it's not our enemy, but is useful if it vehiculates our conatus like an affectus that search for joy, but while is a really destructive force when it relates to a rationalistic model of oppression. That is what I call the judgmental apparatus. So if we want to follow Spinoza and Simondon, we can say that subjectivity is a space of production of images and thoughts, and we can't no more distinguish between nature and culture, between matter from idea, between passion and logic. And if we avoid to refuse the complexity of living, and we accept this complexity, also accepting to have less fast solutions to our needs, maybe we can open a way for this inventive ability of our perception and our creativity. But if we treat our subjectivity like the nomos of the land, putting boundaries, limiting our potentia, our conatus, and limiting our possibility of indetermination, then we reproduce the same fascist scheme, I guess, that we saw in the past. That's why it's important to never forget the complexity of our passion into the digital processes. If not, I guess we produce something that is really horrible. In fact, for returning on the problem of Facebook, we are witness of the fact that always is used to use violence on the others. On Facebook, there are many groups that are encouraging for racism, homophobia, and so on. And so the problem is the way in which we interpret our subjectivity. because we can put different contents on social social networks, on digital networks. Well, so I guess that for freedom, it's important the indetermination and the desire of experimentation, and not to search for a commodified freedom or a fast solution, because if not, we produce always this separation between passions and what Heidegger would say calculating reason, the sort of reason that only calculates. We can use a Deleuzian term that is individual. We are individuals. We are no more subject. We are numbers on internet. So I suggested to avoid this scheme of nomos of the land that has been applied also to our psyche. Because in this way we can let our multitude to go on. We are not only multiple in numbers, we are also multiple in qualities. And we have to push always over our ability to produce multiplicity in ourselves for first. So to do experience also of aesthetical states of mind and of body, because only this can break the wall between me and another person, and so to produce a more fluid connection, and I hope so a conjunction rather than simply a juxtaposition of different elements, because the aim would be the event like a transformation, but it's not possible the transformation into a space that has been colonized with boundaries. This is a scheme that we can refer to material level, but also to symbolical level. And I mainly refer to digital subjectivity. And it's really interesting for me instead to think about the fluxex as an emotional landscape. While we are educated in a continuous process of design and construction of boundaries, both symbolic and conceptual, and so we have growth. We have grown through schemes, speeches, and so our emotions are cut and are sold to us. There is a sentimental education, but it's also an alienation. And I will recall another cultural scheme. For example, in the 18th and 19th centuries, we had a phenomenon of Bildungsroman. It's a German word. It means the production of novels for the formation of the bourgeois subject. So this discursive level is not a new thing. Today happens through digital technologies, but in the past it happened through the production of novels in which there is the production about feelings, and they were used for the formation of the bourgeois subject. And through those novels, they learned to interpret their own emotions, and they learned to manage them. So to be integrated into society. And in those Bildungsroman, we saw that the disordered passion were refused. So this kind of subjectivity has been formed refusing the disorder. And I guess that this still acts, this scheme, into the digital technologies, because they work on the level of discourse, but also perception. While the problem today and the risk is the fact that everything is more immediate, is more radical, is more deep and more fast. And so we have less time to develop a critical thinking because we are struck deep into a preconscious level, an affective level from media images that are an expression of power that nourishes us, but at the same time empties us, empties us, and manages us, making profit and making us unable to produce joy and satisfactions. And we must be aware that this is a global problem, not a singular problem. While a lot of people think that it's a singular problem, and so use drugs to overcome this problem, but it's not an individual problem, it's a global problem. And so the emotional distress is medicalized and criminalized and is weakened in its political ability. And it's important to search for general solution to general problems and not individual solution. I will say something more about this level of discourses as salvation, but before to go on, I will leave a bit of space if you want to say something.
Hold on a second. Hello? Does anybody else have comments? It looks like everybody's volumes are up.
Okay. Well, I will go on to the level of discourse as a promise of salvation, and through the practice of confession. We confess ourselves in digital technologies, and we believe for a certain ways that after which it will follow a solution from the burdens of sins and a reintegration into community. But this process is guided by conductors, and we can see this as solution not only on an individual level but also a political level. We think of the tribunals, the political tribunals that happen to on it's very strong. This is a very I would say that this process of salvation through discursive level produces a sort of approval, an approval mechanism through which people understand how to behave. So before we're told that we have the opportunity to do comments, to answer, but every one of us using the social network can reflect on his changing. I am changed. The way in which I answered in the past is not the same in which I answer today. For many foreign aspects is a good thing, because maybe I have understood how to be included in a larger discussion. But it's a boundary that I put to myself. It's a sort of judge that acts like in a tribunal on myself, because me too, I have interiorized the governmentalization of my behavior, and it's not always there's not always the need of an external shepherd, because we are becoming the shepherd of ourselves. What is at stake is the model that we have interiorized, the root, as I was telling before, like a root in my consciousness. And this sort of inclusion, the promise of joy passes through this social inclusion, this mediatic inclusion. But the problem on which I would reflect is the fact that it requires a continuous self-improvement. In this sense, I would recall the fractalization by Tifo, because also in communication, also in our confessionals on social network, we are working in a continuous self-empowerment. It's the same, it's a continuum between the job market and between the social relations, because every one of us also in digital discourses still works on himself, always improving himself to be accepted. But it's a sort of constant attention on ourselves. Some scholars talked about the narcissism like a continuous, a constant attention to ourselves that produces a narcissistic subjectivity. I don't read in this way because it seems to me that it's a way to produce a new sense of guilty. I don't feel narcissistic in this way, but I admit that I have a constant attention to my image, for example, that is changed. Also, my Facebook profile, in the first time I was moved to post some jokes, and now I'm starting to be more and more serious. And so it's a job that I do to the production of my subjectivity, but it's a job that is not paid by no one, but is a source of value, of production of value, of of who manages Facebook, that became so every day more rich. And I can talk a sort of pedagogy of subjectivity mediated by new media. That so it is oriented because the new media and the social media requires a better subjectivity, so to be more famous, more accepted. It means more I like, more followers, and so on. Is a production of value on my subjectivity. And so I guess that this anthropological model is no more imposed in an authoritarian manner, but is interiorized. Why? Because it uses my feelings, my desire to be loved, to be accepted, to be a part of something. So that's why I give my feelings to Facebook. And at the same time, I also work for Facebook, and in this I can see a sort of danger, because our emotions are at work, but we don't receive absolutely nothing from this. And Foucault certainly was the first to understand that power is no longer exercised by the sovereignty, but through the production of subjectivity. And we consider the show television, people are confident with the show. And it's not an imposition from the external, it's internal. And in Deleuze, the production of interiority is a way to produce a void in subjectivity, so to put inside the root of obedience. As to say that we accept not some hidden rules in a very deep way that are referring to the management of our body and of our emotions. So in this way, we don't realize how much the differences are cancelled in favor of an approval. I cancel some differences in order to be approved by the others. And this process is not neutral, because I guess that it follows the values of Western subjectivity, that means white, masculine, and patriarchal. So I would say that governmentality uses the digital medium not only to inform, but to subjectify using the level of my desire, our desire. And sorry. And this search for social status in new media is analyzed by the American sociologist Marwick. Marwick argues that we no longer speak of audience in media, but of connected subjects in communication, and we had this shifting from the economy of attention to an economy of reputation. This is very important, I guess. The economy of reputation of subjects that seeking a status to be included. And in my point of view, we can speak of a sort of new form of accumulation through acclamation and contempt in the production of subjective value. And so in this, as a rule, the reputation, the salvation has a good reputation. And each of us is engaged in maintaining the reputation of on the web. And this is a job. We manage our reputation on the social network. And at the same time, each of us become a small medium, a small radio station, a small newspaper, because we post, tweet, blog, we communicate emotional states. If we recall Foucault, social media are the technologies of the self. Foucault didn't add this, of course, didn't mean this, but we can use the concept of the technology of the self, referring to this sort of governmentalization of our emotion in which we take part, because the level of our emotion maybe is low, and maybe we don't have enough joy, so we accept all this. And there is a big difference between the production of subjectivity of the past, because in the past it was produced a subject useful for factory and for bureaucracy, while what we are producing now with the web. Certainly, basically, we are produced as consumer, but I guess also as I already told, as fascist subjectivity, and we must be well aware of the fact that also we can also use technologies every day, but if we put some fascist contents, it's not a form of liberation, of course. And I guess that the problem of the reputation is really linked to this sort of tribunal of the subject, of this judgmental subjectivity, because it's horrendous when you don't have the reputation, when you lose the reputation. There is a mood machine that destroys us. It's really horrendous. And we have the risk to product this self-celebrated subjectivity, emotionally toxic, and a society in which inequalities are always more and more acting. I don't want to say that it is inevitable, Horizon. I only wanted to repeat, work on the awareness of the schemes. And with Nietzsche, I repeat, it's important to stimulate our passions, because this is the only way through which humanity can survive. And with this very Nietzschean statement, I would let you, I would give you some space. But you heard me.
Laura, I just wanted you to know that that we did address your topic earlier. Just so you know, I don't know if you want to pick up on that or.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry I had to leave. The topic of the part that has no part, or the topic of the deeply gendered and policed nature of women's participation on the web. Which topic? Because
it was
yeah. Sorry. The gender. Yeah, I mean it's really striking. There's just a cacophony of fury, certainly with young women on sites like Feministing. There's a lot of young women doing feminist blogging and feminist journals. I teach women's studies at Yale, and I know a lot about this. And it's a howling mob that goes after them. And so it's not, yes, it is empowering, but it's also terrifying and really policed. I mean, it's a powerful enactment of policing. I don't know if you saw the video of the young woman who is a professor at Arizona State University who was accosted by policemen on campus. There's a horrible video that's going on in my Facebook feed. And she was really, the policeman grabbed her and threw her around. All she was doing was jaywalking across the street on campus. He's a campus policeman. And she said, "I'm a professor." And he said, show me your papers. And she got angry, and he got hostile and violent. And that was enacted in the form of bodies. But that's what's happening to women's expression on the internet, and particularly young feminists. They think they have a right to cross the street. They think it's their campus. They think that they have a right to speak, and they get grabbed and hurled around, and it's frightening. And yes, it does. It's toxic. It does produce fear, suicide for some. So the question, what I've been interested in, is that our discussion about emotion is leaving out a kind of hierarchization of who gets to have what emotion. So when we say, and you know, when Claudia, you say the job of a philosopher is to bring back the emotion, stimulate feeling, yes, but there's a horrible amount of awful feeling that's out there, and it's magnified. It's also magnified by the digital machine. So where do our beautiful philosophical thoughts actually work with praxis? Maybe it's what people have to confront, and it's like the policeman. It's like Althusser's policeman saying, "Hey, you," and you are subjectified in a moment of confrontation and pain, and perhaps you realize that, but that's what's happening. It's not just a place where particularly young women can express themselves. So I just wanted to bring that up. I mean, the part that has no part, Rancière's idea of politics, is when the part that has no part participates, is when the whole structure has to change. This is an example of that. These young women have no part. They don't get to say what they think. When they try, they are the part that has no part. And the political structure reacts with fury. And it's interesting. I think it's very important for us to follow that, because that is where the morphing of the structure and the recreation of affect and emotion is going to come from. The way I understand Rancière is, politics is not the political structure. The political structure defines itself as politics, but it's already inherently controlled. It's itself, and it says, "I am politics." And to be itself, it creates a box, and there's a part outside that box. And it's when the part outside the box says, "We want a part," that the confrontation happens. So it's also, that's true of populations. It's also true of emotions. And here's a good concrete example: is these young women trying to say what hasn't been said. Nobody cares what they think. Nobody's ever cared what they think. And now they're there, and it's a furious reaction. And it's an important one. That's what I would want to say.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I think there's an interesting point that she made about the policing on internet. On internet, the policing doesn't need to be organized like physical world. Different interest groups police each other, so in a sense affect each other's emotions by attacking, as she was saying. So that was an interesting thing that went through my mind.
Thank you, Salim.
It's interesting too. I mean, one of the other questions that comes to mind for me is the question of liberal subjectivity. is the liberal subject is, how does the liberal sort of universal subject, which is usually gendered male and white and upper class, how is the liberal subject privileged in the social media space as being more capable of speaking, of being more deserving of likes, of being less deserving of negative comments, less deserving of trolling and that kind of thing? Are there ways in which this trolling is how exactly does this medium, because it kind of reminds me of what you were saying earlier, Claudia, about you were kind of implying about panopticism, I think, that how panopticism has this normalizing effect. So when we're in social media, we're completely aware that anyone else could be viewing what we're doing, and therefore, and because of that viewing aspect, that feeling of being watched, it's very, very difficult not to biopolitically reproduce exactly what that gaze would imply, what the liberal gaze or the liberal subject would imply. It's very difficult not to reproduce that in a social media space because it is a supposedly universal space, even though it's not, and and that tends to reproduce those types of activities and to normalize them in many respects, arguably.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. It's difficult. I think you're right. It's difficult to avoid to reproduct the, the relation of forces on social network. Surely, the liberal subject has. Well, I would say that we can see a difference between the power to impress the others between different subjects. I mean, for first on Facebook, for example, it has been introduced the opportunity to promoting our statuses with money. I don't know if you noticed this. I can write a status, but if I want to be more popular, I can pay so that my status is more visible to more people and is always is visualized at the top. This is an important changing that I guess regards the greater opportunity from someone to be listened and also acclaimed. And another point that I have noticed on for always on Facebook is that the basic condition of subjects influences the level of his virtual reputation. If I write a statement, it has not the same consensus than if is an important professor. If the two write the same things, the reactions on Facebook will be different because it will always prevail the previous difference of power. And also on this, that's why often our aim to create some groups of critical thinking on Facebook often fail. And but nevertheless, I guess that if we are aware of the mechanism of acclamation, maybe we can avoid to be only victims.
What difference does it make that where Laura was talking about feministing and other feminist blogs when it's specifically set aside to be not just a kind of liberal universal space like Facebook is, but when it's set aside to be when a digital space is set aside to be specifically a non-liberal space and a more specific space. It sounded to me like Laura was suggesting that even in those spaces, there's all kinds of people going in and making comments and trolling and all of these things, and of course that happens on Facebook too, given its supposedly universal nature. But is there any way to create a space that would not is there any way that we can imagine a non-liberal specific online space? Is that even really possible?
I don't know, really.
Maybe only if it's a closed space, somewhat like GCAS, you know.
Well, yeah.
Mhm. But you know the shepherd or the tribune, it's the people that control the spaces, the algorithms, the way it's set up. It's not transparent to us. We just think you log on, but it's being controlled minutely at every minute, and the spaces are different. You know, BuzzFeed is different from, you know, they're different. And they have different ways that they deal with the public, and there's law, there's digital law. You want to there's I don't mean the legal system. I mean there are laws about how each kind of website proceeds, and I think we need to be educated in what are the laws of this domain. Who comes in? Who speaks? Who is the tribune? Who judges what is decent speech or not? You know, we haven't even begun to try to talk about how to study that. We just walk across all these different domains as if they're the same space because they're digital, but they're not at all the same space.
Yes, I agree. I guess that we have underestimated this problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the years of 99, 2000, 2001, I was helping a friend who was running a website for Afghan community in diaspora, mainly in the West, who had access to internet, so to speak, back then. That law that Laura was talking about, as a moderator of the chat rooms and the blogs, there was not really a coherent law. It was mainly driven by how we can make that more popular. So profit was the only purpose. There was nothing else. Even our political views were based on that. We were basically trying to get as many people on as possible. At times, I remember that there was one moderator that she had a huge following. The owner of the website actually negotiated with her so she would stay, even though they had a severe disagreement, just so they would not lose the clients. I don't think that they're very. Most of them are motivated mainly for profit, and I think even Facebook is like that. But on another point that Jason was speaking about, reproducing the liberal image on media. I can tell you, for instance, I'm from, I was born in the Middle East. My name is Middle Eastern. So when I'm posting something, I have to literally watch what I'm saying because I know that there is someone watching the whole thing. So there's a continuous self-censorship if you're not of that privileged white male category, and I'm sure it occurs for women in different ways, and other minority groups. So.
Yeah, in fact, thank you. I guess that we are obsessed by popularity. This is the sickness of our emotions. Because popularity has assumed the role of the redemption. This is the problem. And our sickness of emotions acts through this judgmental subjectivity. So on YouTube, every one of us becomes the judge of himself and teaches to the others how to judge the others. Because we have underestimated the level of emotionality. I guess.
Can I also raise? I don't know the name of the person who talked at the very beginning about the legal case about the information that can be gathered from cell phones. Who's that? Bruce. Somebody.
That was me, Laura. Bruce.
Well, I thought that's very important, and it relates to this discussion too, because it isn't only that they can now search for information and use it to charge you for a crime, it's actually now prospective. That is, they can create a pattern of your activities and predict that you will commit a crime. It's not just that they are trying to find the crime you have committed, but the accumulation of this information is now going into algorithms which predict what you will do, and they can use them to prevent in the future. And that's a level of subsumption of the individual into this apparatus that is even, I mean, that's really, it's not a new principle of policing. I mean, from the very beginning of policing, well, I mean, I'm interested in the history of photography, and I'm interested in the use of photographs by the police. And the reason that the police started to use photographs was because they wanted to predict recidivism in the cities. So they wanted to know, what does a criminal look like? What does a pickpocket look like? What does a, you know, what does this type of criminal look like? And so they did a lot of work with the visual image so that they could predict what criminals would repeat, so that they could, so this predictive analytics is what this gathering of information is about. The danger isn't only that they can find out what you did. The danger is they're going to decide what you're going to do and change your world in ways, since you've never done the thing you're going to do, you don't even know how they're going to change the world. And the popularity is a part of this accumulation about us. And there's a futurity. We were talking a lot the first day about the futurity, and where is the future? And the future, we are the future that has no future, because the future itself is now being colonized by this process of information gathering. So I wanted to add that to the discussion, because I'm afraid that we're thinking about popularity, accumulation, without sort of on this side of the screen, the side we're watching and conversing on, without understanding what the algorithms are really about, and what the law is moving towards. And so I don't know, Bruce, whether you want to pick up that thread, or if it's comprehensible to you what I said at all, but these cases, why they're important is not just because they're going to catch you for something you did. It's because they're going to decide you're going to do something.
I enjoy hearing you make that commentary, Laura. Well, I've enjoyed all your commentary, but to focus on this topic for a moment, the point you just made was where I was headed when my fancy-dancy Apple Mac Air modem disconnected. But what I'd like to add to what you said, because you've spoken well of many points I had in my head, and actually I sent Jason sort of an overview, an outline last night, and I considered inserting a minority report into my observations, but I didn't want to sort of marginalize the point of this. What I want to say to enrich your observations, Laura, is that what I found particularly troubling and significant about this Supreme Court case is that an ambitious prosecutor could read the Supreme Court as suggesting an endorsement of what you just said, Laura, that they take this biopolitical machine, look at our entire, what I call mechanized history, because they're not going to see what I did when I'm 12 years old if I haven't brought that into the system. Okay, but the implication is that police can profile and do a minority report based on my photographs, my this, my that, and it's the endorsement implied by the U.S. Supreme Court that makes this so threatening and significant. And so that's the enrichment I wanted to make to your point. Otherwise, we have a very similar point of view.
Yeah, thank you. Yes. Yes, and so this discussion about the law is very interesting. Claudia, you said you've been studying the law, and I was interested to know more about that. And this question of love, it's the love of a different future. It's this question of the law. You know, the law, somebody said, is arranged around profit. Absolutely. Arranged around control, arranged around don't do this, don't do this. And what I think we need is, what you said, a law arranged around love. But it has to be an understanding of love that can speak to these terribly vertiginous emergencies that we're already entangled in. Yeah.
Laura, I just wanted to add one further enrichment, and then I promise I'll stop talking.
Great. No, please don't.
I attended a legal seminar recently, and I just want to stick to what I think is interesting about that. The question came up about lawyers advising their clients who become involved in litigation about what those clients can do with information, with data that they have produced in their Facebook. And the caution was to tell the lawyer audience, if your client is in litigation and your client seeks to delete information that he or he has put on Facebook, that can be considered punished under the law as destruction of evidence. Now, let's forget the tedious legal aspects of that. Who cares for the moment? But I saw Celine's reaction, and that was exactly the reaction I was looking for when I brought this point up, that it comes down to who. Now the system owns my historical information on Facebook. If I'm in litigation and the other party to the litigation wants to use that information against me in the case, I have lost ownership over my disposition of that information. That is very dangerous and troubling and salient to our discussion.
Yes. Right.
Is this the case only when I mean, is this like retroactively enforceable, or is this the case only when a case has been brought to court?
It is. You've asked a good question. I just want to pause to give you a careful answer. Jason, if I'm not answering your question, stop me. But if today, right now, I delete something that's on Facebook, my buddy just came in, I don't want him to have to hear everything. If I delete something today on Facebook, it's outside the scope of my comments. But if I file suit against, let's pick my former summer employer, Kellogg Company. If I file suit against Kellogg Company, and then I choose to delete information that I put on Facebook, then the considerations that I brought up come into play. And I think the buzzwords we can use is that's when I lose possession of that information.
Wow.
It's dangerous.
It's very dangerous, and as I expressed to Jason, we all know that these points that we've been discussing, they're actually obviously inherent in Facebook, but it's just that we're seduced and we don't think about them.
Right. Right.
I did a little experiment. I used to be in a law firm, and the law firm hired some young women, and just to do my own little experiment, I looked up one of these women. I found her on Facebook. I picked up a great deal of information about her. I spent about 4 minutes on this, and it occurred to me that just how creepy it would have been if I had said to this woman, "Hello, nice to meet you. Now let me tell you everything I know about you from looking on Facebook." I mean, it would have been completely disastrous from a social interaction, but for our discussion, it's very salient.
So
Go ahead. Sorry.
So the question of producing a subjectivity that understands some kind of freedom, that subjectivity has to metabolize these threats to freedom. And we've only begun to turn away from the pleasure of Facebook, and I intensely love my Facebook, to see what's the ambivalence of it, as Claudia says. That's all I want to say.
And you know, Paul Virilio, one of the most pessimistic readers of the cultural effects of technology around by far. Even he, though, says that he's a lover of what he calls the art of technology, and he says that the same way that you know, an art lover can love art without loving all art, you know. So you know, and if you're truly an art lover, at least according to common perceptions, if you're truly an art lover, you are very critical of art. Actually, in fact, you should know something about art criticism, probably. You know, in some definitions of that. And so you're not going to like all art. You're going to like some art, and you're going to maybe encourage certain types of art or certain, you know, themes or certain techniques to be pursued. So if you really love technology, quote unquote, as people you know, say that they love various softwares and things like that, then it is really important actually to be hypercritical of that thing, so that it can become so either it can become a better version of itself, or so that something else some other new thing can emerge. So I think it could be a little. I kind of agreed with what Bifo said yesterday, that, you know, this idea that we should only be optimists about technology or pessimists. It doesn't really capture. I mean, because in being critical, you can actually be optimistic as a result of your criticism, in a way, and probably the reverse too. So, just a thought.
If I can.
Please.
Yeah. I just want to recall Laura's great comment on the question of predictability of law. That is a topic on which I wrote, and so it's really very interesting to me. I guess that the problem of law is exactly this. It's ability to predict the future. You are, I guess, absolutely centered the point, because how to limit if I don't imagine what you will do in the future. But it is the trap of a culture that limits the indetermination and produces some belief that we accept, on which the legal power takes a justification to produce the sort of model projected on the future. I try to explain better. We use the expression eusteron proteron. Eusteron proteron are two terms from ancient Greek. Eusteron means after, proteron means before. What I want to say, that this level of predictability of law, I guess that is a trap because it's based on a eusteron proteron. I want to say that the prediction of what I will do is already conditioned from what I think today. This is the problem of a limiting law, of a law that is not able to improve my behaviors, but only to limit my behaviors, because it arises from a model of humanity that I call anthropological model, and as I define it in the syllabus, Homo economicus, Homo mercantilis, well, Homo legalis, Homo consumans, Homo virtualis, Homo vulnerabilis. These are, in my opinion, the schemes on which is based the interpretation of law, and that produces this trap that is the predictability. It is not really possible to predict the future, but we can try to produce some form of regulations, of course, but renouncing to this idea of a closed subjectivity predictable in the future. And I would like to do a concrete example. I am very suspicious in confront of those anthropological models because I refer them, as I already told, to this problem of justification of the intervention of law on our lives. I do the example of Homo virtualis. It has been produced, this anthropological model according to which the digitality is only an extension of our natural trend of our mind. And on the basis of this, for example, Italian government, the Ministry for Education and Research, produced a law according which in the school you have to use some softwares, and also the level of teachers are evaluated on the basis of the use of this software. As we can see, this is only a way for an agreement on the economical basis between the government and the producers of those softwares. But there is a discursive level that inherits the law and inherits the predictability that is based on a prejudice. But this prejudice is not neutral, it's the expression of a great power that is introducing some digital devices into the school. I can agree with the use of devices, but the problem is not to agree or not agree. My problem is the mechanism. I can do another example, another way on the basis of which the legal level predicts our future. Some decades ago, Thomas Schelling, the Nobel Prize, defined an anthropological model saying that we consume because we are naturally consumers. And in this way, there has been a justification of an apparatus of power with the intersection of law and economics on the basis of this eusteron proteron. I say that you are in this way, on the basis of this definition, I produce the future. And in this sense, I guess that you told a great, really, also if dramatically comment when you told that there is no future. But we have to face this. I absolutely agree with this. But we have to be aware of the historical changing. In modern time, for example, prevailed the model of Homo mercantilis, according which, in Smith, subjects are naturally disposed to the exchange. In this way, it has been built the modern state. So we have to be aware of this anthropological model, because I guess that are tied to an idea of law and apparatus of power that predicts our behaviors according to an anthropological model. This is my reading of this problem. It is a way only to limit us.
Great, thank you. Well, we are now at 2:30, so if you call the meeting to a close, we can, and then tomorrow will be Tiziana Turek. So
Thank you.
Thank you very much. See you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
bye.